So you can do a lot of things and find out a lot of information. And most importantly, you can communicate or send signals directly to creation, the creative source, which is an infinite number of spirit forms just like ourselves, who we all have evolved to the point where they know how to create and run universes. And you sometimes will get answers back. What's the importance of this? This enables you to find truth for yourself. The ultimate learning system. If you have questions about yourself or life and you know the proper symbols and can open the doorways, these things are available to you. Well, imagine Billy, after sitting in this seat, at 7 years old, all this comes back to him. All the language comes back to him so they can communicate with him. And then he steps outside of the craft and is sent back home. He's standing in a forest, 7 years old, out in Switzerland. Craft disappears. He goes back home. For the next few years, his education continues. They challenge him to remember things that have happened to him in his past and so forth, all about himself. So he has a very interesting childhood. Now, most of us, when we're 8, 9 years old, we're working on spelling between the lines and figuring out, 4 times 3 and so forth, and doing our painting projects. Billy made it through the 3rd grade. And at that point, one part of his mind was still learning math at the local school, and the other part of his mind is being crammed full of all these very high, sophisticated technical things that they want him to learn. As well as he can't sleep because at night the dream state is so serious with all the stuff that's flooding into his head that we have a very confused young boy here. So he didn't finish his education. Instead, he quit going to school. His parents weren't paying much attention, so Billy would leave the house in the morning, go out into the forest, be left alone, sit down in the forest by himself at 10 years old, go into his meditative state. The stuff would start flowing in. He got educated in the forest. Billy has not lived a life at all like the rest of us. He's never had a driver's license, never owned a car. He's really never even gone into town. He's been living out in the country his whole lifetime. Then at the age of 16, something very interesting kind of happened. On his 16th birthday, the voice he's used to hearing all the time, he thought would come in to wish him happy birthday, was getting very familiar with it. Instead, the voice changed, and it was another voice came into his head. It was a female voice that said she would take over his education, and now it was time to do some serious work. Let's leave home, the voice said. The voice told him to go to India and start studying, that they would direct him where to go. He was led out to India, to an ashram in Meiruli, India, where for the next 3 years he stayed in those areas and studied their philosophy, the different philosophies of man, went over into Tibet, crossed over there, studied with them, came back. During the 3 years, he had almost 100 contacts with these beings who started showing up in the disk, taking him aboard the crafts and moving him back and forth in time for his own education. When he was 19, he had to finally make the decision whether or not he wanted to go public, whether or not he would work with them to do this or not. Then they says, it's your decision. Now we're going to leave you alone for 11 years to get your life in order. You're a young man. Go get your wife. Go get your children started. Get your family started, and we'll be back. Well, he says, this isn't going to be real easy because I've already seen most of my life inside the craft. He says they have viewing screens that can show you the past or the future. He already knew who his wife was going to be. He already knew he was going to have 3 children. He already knew where he was going to live. He says, this isn't exactly fair. I feel like there's kind of a plan out there. I just have to kind of walk in the right steps. So he says, well, I guess I'll go to Greece where I'm supposed to go, and I'll be meeting my wife in about 14 days on the side of the road. And it happened, just like they told him. He met his Calliope. They were married on December 26th. He was 19, she was 17. They had to sneak across the border because she was underage. Made his way back into Switzerland where he went, and they had their children, and he settled down in the farm area where he was comfortable. At this point, let me show you some of the pictures and things that happened to him. I know some of you have seen many of the pictures before, but I can see on some faces you haven't. We'll go through those rather quickly and show you some because they're always kind of exciting to see some of the pictures. I've got the slide tray going, and I'm on a leash here. Maybe someone could help me start the slide projector. And I think we'll have to slide a little bit this way now, so it'll go by this gentleman. All right, well, let's see what happens to us here if we can get an image going here. Do we have any control over lights here? All right, light control. And let's see if we get a nice image here or where we're at. Top row up above. There we go. Well, we can kind of see him. Let's see. This light here is kind of getting on them, huh? How about if I kind of like this? Can we see okay? Now imagine if your young childhood has been like this and you've been in India and you come back to Switzerland where the rest of us in our normal life are, just getting our jobs and going to college, and instead you hear the voice in your head again. It says it's time to come out and start the meetings again, and the voice tells you to bring your camera this time, we're going public. And you go out to the location they direct you to, this thing flies in, and this is a shot from I think his second or third contact. We're January 1975, out in the middle of the forest area, about an hour east of Zurich, Switzerland, and this dish shows up. Here's one of the older pictures taken in India back in 1956. Mehruli, he's only 19 years old, and they're picking him up in this disc and trying to educate him. This is his home where he lives now in Schmidruti, Switzerland. It's about 7,000 feet up in the hills. I took these. I stayed there for several months in the summer, and every night after dinner I like to climb up on top of this hill because it's so pretty and just look out over the valley. Do you know I found, well, I kind of lost count, over 15 people in the area and who live there who have seen the disc, seen them come in by accident. Found 3 people who've driven Billy out to the contacts, watched the crafts come in and pick him up, and then one night I got to see them myself. I asked Billy if I could see them, and they came by and let me watch. I got to go out in front of the house and stand there with him and watch the disc come in and float over the house. So it's pretty spectacular when you actually see them. Here's one of the few pictures we have of it on the ground. Most of the contacts were during the daytime. They were going on almost on a weekly basis. Billy would get this familiar cooling sensation. He'd hear the voice in his head telling him where to go. He'd go out to the area that they'd chosen. And many times they would set the craft down on the ground like you're looking at here. They'd get out of the ship, sit down and chat. I think, to me, one of my most memorable memories of him telling me about the contacts is at the first meeting on January 75, a lady stepped out of one of these crafts, came over and sat down. They talked for an hour and 20 minutes underneath the tree. And Billy asked the lady, he says, "Who are you?" She says, "Well, my name, you can call me, the name that I chose for myself is Semyazi." And she says, "Semyazi, how do you spell that, or what does it mean? Is that a family name?" She says, "No, we don't have family names like you do. We don't pass the names on like you do. We've quit doing that. Instead, we've evolved to a point spiritually where we are more in touch with who we are as a spirit. We understand our incarnation cycles better. So we choose names which the name identifies the path of discovery we are on and the type of education we're working on during this lifetime. And in our language, the sound, Semyazi with a Z, means a woman with half the knowledge of nature. And that's her study. She's trying to solve more of the equations about nature in relationship to man. Well, Billy was trying to make his notes and was trying to make some, write it down phonetically how the name sounded to him. So he wrote it out, S-E-M-Y-A-S-E, Semyazi. So all of his notes, that's what he always called her, but that's how she called herself. She said on that first meeting that they've been watching this for quite a period of time. Their race is quite old. They are descendants of people from the constellation Lyra.